Hi, I'm Tom Beller. I'm an associate professor in the English department at Tulane, and I direct the creative writing program. And I'm a last-minute sub for the inventor of the panel and the designated moderator who couldn't be here, Kate Baldwin, my colleague in the English department. So we have three really interesting writers with very distinct experiences as authors and publishers. And I'm going to just let them introduce themselves and give each one of them some time to talk about their experience and then ask them some questions. So we'll begin with Colleen.
Hi, I'm Colleen Rothman. I'm a local writer, Louisiana native, although I spent about 10 years in Chicago. Moved back to New Orleans in 2018, really tried to become part of the local literary community. And in 2020, during the depths of the pandemic, I founded an online literary magazine called Nurture, a literary journal which publishes flash fiction, fiction under 1,000 words, flash nonfiction, same word count, and poetry. And it's just run by me right now. I'm looking to expand, but I can talk about the process of both submitting work to literary magazines as a writer and also reading work from people who trusted me enough to do right by their words and put them online and maintain them there for, in perpetuity. So I'm really happy to be here. Thanks, Tom, and happy to learn more about what Brad and Chris have to say about publishing and editing.
Hi, my name is Chris Romaguera. I am not a Louisiana native, but I've been here for the last 12 years. I also don't run my own lit mag, so I'm just,
That's right.
Yeah. I'm the poetry editor at Podunk Review, which is a local publication. We do very beautiful, I would say, hardcover books, publishing fiction, nonfiction, poetry. We also do contests for high school students as well as for incarcerated folk. I came into editing I went to UNO for my MFA, and I came into editing through working through Bayou as a reader for fiction. But I've been an editorial intern at Electric Lit, as well as I was the fiction editor for New Southern Fugitives out of Atlanta, Georgia. I have experience both as a writer and an editor, and I also will be taking notes to learn from these brilliant writers next to me. I'll go to you.
Hi, I'm Brad Richard. I am from here. I have taught creative writing high school and middle school for many years, and I'm happily retired now. I have several books of poetry, and I am an editor for an imprint of a small poetry press called the WordWorks, which is now in its 50th year. So I'm a little different from these two in terms of my editorial work. So the imprint that I run receives submissions in April and May, basically. And then I work with the team of readers to review the submissions and select finalists, which we then forward to a judge who makes the final selections. So I'm happy to complement the editorial work that these guys do with magazines.
I'll start with a question for Colleen, which is, I'm so impressed and intrigued with the title of your magazine and the other words that it suggests. It's sort of you hear the word nurture and nature comes to mind. But I'm very interested to know why you foregrounded flash fiction as the stuff that you're interested in publishing or are publishing, and what your thoughts about that form and less flash fiction are.
Well, lots of great questions there. At the time that I started the journal, I was pretty embedded in literary Twitter, which to some extent, RIP. But I was reading a lot of short fiction that was published online, and a lot of journals that are publishing work online do tend to limit the word count. So if you've got a short story that's 8,000 words, it may or may not find a home in some of these journals where either for space limitations or just how much attention that you can get from somebody scrolling on their phone, they've decided to cap the submissions accordingly. And I think what that's done is it's created a space for experimentation and play online where a lot of writers, there was a flash fiction piece that was Mad Libs that this writer Kim McGowan did. There's been pieces published in crossword form, just different like predictive text, different forms and ways to bring some experimentation and play into it that I found really fun. But also I saw that there was a gap in that conversation where, okay, let's think back to 2020. I was in the throes of pandemic parenting and feeling like there wasn't really a space within that experimentation and play for stories about care, caregiving, parenting specifically, but all of the ways that we were caring for each other or not caring for each other during that time. And so I entered the space with kind of this broad theme, and I didn't really know where people were going to go with that. And I got a lot of submissions that were very close to that theme. Some were great, and some just started to feel, after a little while, over and over, kind of like the same note. But people who were able to take that theme and maybe make it a little speculative or surreal and really push into that place of experimentation and play that the online forum really makes available. Those were pieces that I felt like, okay, I didn't really know what it was when I started, but I'm like, this is a nurture piece. So that's kind of the genesis of the journal and what it's become.
Thank you. Chris, I was so interested to read this personal essay you wrote about your life as a pickup basketball player. My last book is called Lost in the Game, a book about basketball, which is partly about the gods of the NBA, but a lot of it is about my life as a ongoing player of the game in public spaces in various cities. And I want to hear, Chris, about your life as a writer and an editor and how those two things interact, how one informs the other.
Well, first off, don't let my size fool you. Last year, I was definitely waiting on a call from the Pelicans when injuries hit. We'd be having a very different panel right now. No, I mean, I think to some extent as a writer, I was actually thinking about this on the walk over. It's interesting, you have to have that, they talk about shooter's mentality in basketball, and like a good shooter
Is psychotic, actually.
yeah, like a good drummer. Like, you want a sane drummer? No. That's a metronome. No, you need you need to have the confidence of you missed 10 in a row, not think, the 11th is going in, like without a doubt. And, luckily for me, I remember, funny enough, an online piece that I couldn't recite the title of the author, but like early internet, like GeoCities internet. I remember reading a piece on writing, which it was like a good thing for a writer would be to fall in love with something and fail at it first before becoming a writer. And I thought, oh, how lucky, basketball. It's interesting, like being a basketball player through high school. I was in traveling teams. I went up and down Florida playing. I learned what two-a-days where I learned what doing something. Dr. J has a quote where it's like being a professional is doing something on the days you don't want to do it. And being able to learn things like that and then transition it to writing where it's there are days where, I don't want to bang my head against a keyboard, in front of a blank page for 8 hours, but you figure out a way to do it. You figure out some, doing your version of, I know they changed the names of this, so I can't, the old name of the drill is no longer applicable, but just long running, whatever.
The word he wants to use is suicides.
Yes, that's the word. Yeah, someone told me the other day that was not the term anymore, and I
That's
felt
correct.
bad. But yeah, I don't want to do these things, but I'm going to do something because, little by little, it's going to get the sweat equity. And yeah, so I think that just helped me, slowly embed myself into a writing career where, it felt like my first 3,000 submissions were all denied. It felt like the first few magazines I was an editor for or a reader for ended up going under, but I always came with the confidence that the next one's definitely going in.
I'm just fascinated by your use of the word denied to describe what happens when something you send in gets sent back, because there are other words for that. Mm-hmm. But I seem like a bit of a theme emerging. But before we go on, or maybe appropriately to the poet, since we're talking about precision in language, Brad, tell us about your experiences as somebody who's written very literary work, beautiful poems, and sent them into the world, to the constellation of literary magazines in America, which is a very evolving constellation over the years. how about this? Where did you submit first, and where did you go from there?
So the first place I would have submitted would have been my high school literary magazine. And I'm a graduate of NOCA. I also taught at NOCA. For folks not from here, that's the New Orleans Center for the Creative Arts. And we were also the editors of that journal. So
You had an inside
a
connection.
little bit of an inside connection there. But it could get pretty dicey when people got denied, their work was denied, because they were your friends, supposedly. But then in college, I began submitting very timidly, but to college journals on campus, but also very, very timidly sending out into the world, to the New Yorker or whatever. And slowly, steadily building up a pile of denials. I remember visiting a relatively well-known writer and editor who had their rejection slips. This was back when you got them in the mail, wallpapered on a bathroom. But I remember getting my first significant publication. It was when I was in graduate school at Washington University, and Black Lawyer Review called me to give me an acceptance. And then, it never gets, like, the percentage never really changes, I don't think, that much in terms of, how many of your submissions actually turn out to end up as publications. And I remember complaining about this once, whining, really, to a friend of mine, Reginald Shepard, an amazing poet who is very much missed. And he told me, "Now, Brad, the secret of publication, persistence is the key to publication." And I really took that to heart. It's like, just as with writing itself, you have to be willing to sit there and bang your head against the keyboard, even when you don't want to do it. No one is waiting for you to send them your work. So if you do not send it out, they do not know it exists. So you really have to keep at it.
Well, I have a question, which is, when the Black Warrior Review called you with this happy news, did they reach you, or did they leave a message on your answering machine?
They reached me, but there was another time when Richard Howard accepted a piece, and he did leave a voice message. That was something amazing to come home to.
Well, my question is kind of connected to the fact that, and I'll speak for myself here, the nature of literary magazines, their physical manifestation has changed so much. I've neglected when I began to say that the reason Kate Baldwin, who put this together, came to see me was I, for 20 years, edited a journal called Open City Magazine. And the second 10 years, we had a book imprint. But those 20 years were from 1990 to 2010. So we did make this transition onto the web, but we're in a different place now. So I'm actually looking to you guys to talk about, your thoughts about print or exclusively online, or how, to the extent that you can even quantify this, because it doesn't matter that much, it feels different or is different, or the habits or rituals, or I'm looking to hear from you, to learn from you guys.
I'm happy to speak to that because in preparing for this panel, I was thinking back about my own submission process. And I first started sending my work out to literary magazines in 2017. Digital was already very much a thing, and a lot of the journals that I was looking at were digital only. My first publication was a website called Chicago Literati. I was living in Chicago at the time, and it doesn't exist anymore. And that story is not online anymore. So, things happen. There is change. There's evolution. Print is a little bit more steadfast, you would say, although, journals like the Gettysburg Review, for example, have been going for years, and then all of a sudden the university cuts their funding and they no longer exist either. So there's a lot of change and flux. And when I started Nurture, that was something I said, no matter what happens, I'm going to keep paying for this, URL in perpetuity, so people will always have that link. They can put on their author website, they can link to this, and it will always be there. That was something I felt very strongly about. But yeah, there is a huge ecosystem of places online. They might not be the Paris Review or the New Yorker, or places that, when you're first getting going. I think I sent work to Modern Love. That was one of my first submissions, the New York Times, Modern Love, which, was not ready for that. but that was something it was accessible to me. It was something I had heard about, but there are resources online. There's a website called Duotrope. There's another one, a free resource called Chill Subs, which are databases of journals that are actively publishing right now. And they have a lot of their submission guidelines, what they're looking for. And so I think if you're just starting in your publishing journey, those are two great places to look for, where should I even be submitting? What might be, if I have a weird dolphin story or something, who would be interested in something like that? So those are just a few resources to consider.
Yeah, I have to second Duotrope, which, to connect to something you said, Brad, every time I'm getting down on my publication record, I log into Duotrope, and Duotrope will be like, I haven't been published in blank amount of time. That feels just crazy to me. And all of a sudden, Duotrope will be like, you've been published more than 99% of the, and I was like, what? Huh? So, but no, I definitely recommend Duotrope. I definitely recommend Chill Subs on the idea of magazines going down, especially the online ones. Something that a writer friend of mine taught me that was, I think, really helpful, because most of my publications, and this is not a joke or flexing, have gone down, is I started having to PDF them. Because I wanted to have a note for, I was working as a journalist for a long time. A lot of the local publications I wrote for are all gone. I just started PDFing these things because some of my prettiest online publications ended up going under, and I wanted to have some sort of record of that. And not just for my mom, but for jobs, but for my own self-esteem, but yeah, I mean, and as far as my submission strategy goes, is, since I quoted Dr. J earlier, some days I am not as brilliant as I want to be creatively, and I've tried to learn to channel that into submission days. Some days I'm thinking more business oriented, and so I can't write my next great chapter of my next great novel, so I'm gonna just try to submit and be tactical about, okay, this submission's open, this is available, this is whatnot. And then there's days where I have zero interest in figuring out what the right typography is, about editing the cover letter, about whatever, and then I just want to free write, and I leave the submissions for the next day. But I try to listen to what my body, what my brain wants to do that day, and then just give myself enough time so I could transition whenever I need to.
I think I'll be fairly brief on this because I just want to echo the grief over great journals that have tanked recently, and really due to the institutions that are not supporting them any longer. Mm-hmm. I had a great experience with Green Mountains Review in Vermont, where Liz Powell, the editor there, published 2 longish poems of mine, and she was able to publish them because it was online. So she didn't have to worry about, giving up pages in the print journal for them. And boop, it happened within a matter of a week. That journal was dead, and I no longer have access to those links. They just don't exist anymore. And those links are important for us also for your resume and your website. I want people to be able to find my work. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the ways in which the online journals are really, really useful for writers.
I want to share sort of a counterintuitive anecdote, given the title of the panel, which is, when I was in graduate school and before I'd published anything, but was certainly starting to think of myself as a writer, I did an MFA and I got a lot out of it. I was given the advice to stop submitting for a while. This was particular to doing an MFA, but the notion that was conveyed was, it does take something out of your soul almost to be in this treadmill where you're sending things out. And I distinctly remember I had this bizarre notion, this really naive idea, that the more remote the journal was geographically, the more likely I was to be published in it, as though the mail wouldn't reach them. So I was always sending things to the Alaska Review on the notion that they're thank God someone finally sent something in. But hell with it. I'm just going to tell you this one story about a writer that I still love him, but I don't read him as much anymore. But Dennis Johnson, who's the author of a great story collection, Jesus, His Son, and a bunch of really interesting novels. And he lived in this place called Bonners Ferry, Idaho. And I took this road trip, and got to Bonners Ferry, which definitely is not Alaska, but it qualifies in this. And I had this notion of visiting him. And by then I published something of him in Open City. But I didn't have his number or anything. So I went to the local bookstore, and I did notice that I had expected it to be like a Charlie Chaplin, like one cabin with like a dirt road, Bonners Ferry, I thought. And there was like a wine shop and some other things that would suggest that maybe civilization had reached this place. But I didn't ignore that. The bookshop itself was really nice, kind of overlooked that. Went to the guy at the front and said, I'm looking for Dennis Johnson. Do you know where he lived? I know it. I published. And he goes, yeah, I can help you with that. And I was like, that's so great, man. I'm going to get to meet him. He goes, let me get you his information. And this is how long ago this was. He reached under the desk, where the register was, and he pulled out a phone book, the white pages. And he goes, he's here. Anyway, back to my counterintuitive thought that I want to share with you. The notion was that, you can't help but, it just taps into a different part of your soul and your brain when you're thinking like, I want to get my work out there. Totally necessary work. You can't not do that. But the notion was like, just put that away and let yourself develop as an artist for a while. So this was at a particular time in my life in, my 20s. But it was very helpful advice, I thought. It really changed the way I read and wrote and just changed things to say, I'm going to take a year off. I don't know if I made it to a year, but I made it close, And the work that I finally ended up publishing happened after I made that decision. So I'm not offering that as you all should not go on some kind of cleanse, but I just wanted to share that because there's a strange ecology around submitting things.
Yeah.
Chris and then Brad.
Yeah. No, I don't think I took a year off, and I don't remember going to Idaho, but I do. Like, there was a time in my MFA where I definitely didn't neurotically drink 47 gallons of coffee every morning and refresh submittable like 3,000 times. And I had to teach myself that the 1,000th time you reload your submittable, it doesn't actually improve the odds of them reading and getting back to you. And I do think that there is something to the psyche with that, where like, I think, I had to I had to retrain myself to be like, okay, this is not, in progress isn't leaving you on red, like it actually, once I started becoming an editor on Submittable, I realized that just assigning it to a reader will transition received from in progress, but that doesn't necessarily, if a reader has 1,000 things to read, in progress doesn't mean it's really close. And if you just go give yourself wait, in progress longer is good or in progress longer is bad, you could drive yourself, up a wall. And so I think, everyone has different things that work for them, and maybe taking time off from submitting is good for you. Maybe taking time off from checking submittable. For me, the checking submittable thing, I had to detox myself from, and it definitely helped me out. Yeah.
I'm thinking of a few things. One was advice from my first writing teacher, which was to wait until you really had a good body of work that you were happy with. And you were ready to send out, particularly for poets, multiple different batches of poems. For a lot of reasons, one, it's, if you've been told this is a great story or poem, and it should be published, and you send it out, and you keep having this experience of it getting denied, which is what's probably going to happen. It can undermine your confidence. So, knowing that you've got a body of work that you feel good about, I think really helps. Mm-hmm. There was another thing I was going to say about that, and I have now forgotten. So
I can just add that it's important to remember that writing and publishing are two very different things, as y'all have been saying, and that yeah, you might need to turn that publishing side of your brain off, but like continuing to find people and experiences that nourish your writing is really important. Finding a writing community, finding a writing group or people who can give you that feedback before you send it on to an editor is really important, because a rejection letter is often just a form.
Yep.
It's boilerplate, and you don't know, like, well, what didn't you like? Was it the ending? Was it this? Was it that? And I think that's something that nice, good, well-meaning writer friends can be very honest and say, like, okay, your first line is just, that's not working. So you can't really look for publishing and the publishing world to give you that kind of feedback. I will say, though, that when you are sending your work out, sometimes you can see that there are different tiers of rejection, or if an editor responds personally with like their actual name and their, the fiction editor of such and such review, like, we really want you to send more work, to do that and to take them up on that, and to understand that when you get a rejection that's not a form rejection, that might be a little glimmer that, maybe you should keep going. And to Brad's point, not going through that process when you only have one story that you're sending out might be a good idea, so that if somebody rejects that one story and they still really want to see more work from you, that you do have more work to send to them.
Exactly.
So there's a lot of self-management that you have to do in the process as a writer, where there's no right answer. There's no one who's giving you a guide. You just have to kind of like follow your intuition and maybe set up some things for yourself, like, okay, I'm not gonna check submittable today, or I'm gonna create a submission spreadsheet. This is what I do for myself, where everything is in its own row, and then when I get a rejection, I just hide the row, and then I don't have to look at it anymore. So, or some people turn it different colors, or whatever works for you. But just finding those ways to kind of manage the business side of this whole thing, that can be unpleasant to think about at times. That's been helpful for me.
Yeah, I mean, I have one other nugget to offer that's something I want to share, but you have to take it with a grain of salt, because the magazine I ran is from really another era. It hasn't published for 14 years now, and it started in 1990. But when I get the question about, where are good places to send fiction, nonfiction, poetry, my answer is that you should take the time to, if not browse online, physically browse in a library or in a bookshop, and just monitor what you're interested in, and that your own reading should sort of guide that process. If you've never heard of a publication, of course you can send something to it, and I don't want to sleep on discovering new things, but I feel like the impulse to submit to a place should come from having some engagement with the publication as a reader. And I don't say that, I mean that in the most practical sense, like in some irrational, cosmic, I'm not a very super spiritual person, but I do believe in certain synchronies and serendipities. And I think your odds of being accepted at a publication go up if you like the publication and have read something in it that you go, wow, that's cool. I feel some affinity with that piece that they published, just for yourself almost. So I thought I'd share that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and because there's so many magazines too, because I feel like I've been told that, and it's very good advice, but I feel like it also felt overwhelming. Like UNO has a library of all these literary magazines, and I remember thinking I have to read all of them, and spoiler alert, I have not read all of them yet. But you could also work backwards. You love a writer, you look at their acknowledgments, you're like, hey, Kiese Lehman published here, Maurice Carlos Ruffin published here, Jesmyn Ward published here, and you look at those early publications, you could start from there, reading those. You like those? Good, submit to them. Because, if you like an author, they're going to influence you. If someone published them early before they were Kiese Lehman and Jesmyn Ward and Maurice Carlos Ruffin, they're going to be looking at your stuff too. You could work backwards, and that way you don't have to look at Duotrope and see 3,000 magazines and be like, oh, I got to cancel my weekend plans.
Yeah. Those two things, familiarizing yourself with the publications at least a little bit, and looking at where your favorite writers have published, those are great. And to just connect to something I wanted to make sure I got a chance to say at some point, which was do know them in some way. If you have a great science fiction story, don't freaking send it to a place that isn't going to be interested in science fiction, right? And do the research to know that, right? That's pretty basic. And another thing, and this is from my experience as a book editor, more than as a magazine editor, so I think it's a little bit different, but please look at their guidelines. You know, if they have very specific word count guidelines or formatting guidelines, or whether your name should appear in the work or not, please follow them. You know, it only decreases your chances of being of having your work met favorably by the editor if you're not following their guidelines.
That's all great. So I want to tell you guys, we're going to open this up for questions from you in a couple minutes. But I have one question for Colleen. It says, I am intrigued that it was out of a impulse of being overwhelmed by the early COVID and having a small child and the parenting experience. And you've started this publication called Nurture, which evokes that sort of interest. And I'm wondering, since I assume this is your first publication that you started.
Yes.
So tell us what you've learned or what has surprised you about the process and the submissions you're getting. And
At first I doubted myself. I had a little bit of imposter syndrome, even though I had kind of been engaged in the community for a while. I had friends who were kind of single person on the masthead type of journals. I was like, who am I to say that I could start something like this? But it was fairly easy. I mean, the internet is a very democratized place. I think, for better or worse, pretty much anybody can start a website. I use Tumblr as the kind of the background because I'm not good at WordPress. So very basic publishing tools that I was using, and just putting out a message on Twitter got back a lot of people that I had never met, never heard of their writing, but I discovered their writing and made actual friendships by people who had submitted to the journal. Now we've met at AWP, at writing conference that happens every year offline. So at a time when I felt very socially isolated and physically isolated from a lot of other writers, there were no writing events happening here locally. I was able to use the internet as a tool for connection in a way that, not to sound super earnest, but it felt very pure. And yeah, occasionally I would get pieces that were very violent or, things that were okay, this is just not a good fit for what the vibe that I'm looking for and was able to create. But yeah, I was just really surprised by how easy it was to just put something out there and see what comes back. And the surprising ways that people interpreted that theme. Like my favorite piece that I've published, I love them all, but there's one in particular about a woman who is pregnant with a hive of bees, and just, I forget the word count of that. Yeah. It's a pregnancy story, yes, so it's something I know I'm going to be interested in, given my own, my personal preferences as an editor and what I was looking for with the journal. But I don't know, she was able to just take it and twist it in a way that was just really unique and unexpected. And I will say that was not her first submission. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah.
Did you send her an encouraging note on the previous one?
Yes, I did. I don't know how many times, at least one time, I remember I had said okay, this is okay, but what else do you have? And she sent me something a little weirder, and I was very happy to see that. So, yeah, keep up the weird.
I'm so glad you cited a specific piece. I was going to ask you, if there was something of that nature that you wanted to share that was emblematic of something that excited you that you found. I want to turn this over to you guys to ask questions. I'd also want to mention, before I came, I went to my office and I just pulled a bunch of literary journals from days gone by. A bunch of them are the thing I mentioned that I had done, Open City, but there's copies of the Paris Review and the Partisan Review and some other more random and obscure things. And they're in a pile. So after this session, feel free to just peruse them. Please don't take them. But I just, thought I would put them in the room like the ancestors or something. So with that they don't need to be worshipped. They can be derided and railed against as well, as one does with ancestors. So the whole gamut. So with that as the transition, do we have questions right here in the blue shirt?
This might be a little bit outside the scope, but I did want to ask you, if someone was...
Oh,
I'm
we're making it official. Yeah.
sorry. This might be a little bit outside the scope of the panel, but
I did want to ask, if someone's used to more long-form writing, like novels, would you suggest if they try to send to a magazine that has a word count, would you suggest like sending a chapter so that maybe people could read it and be more interested, or would that be kind of frowned upon by the magazines?
I would say that if there's an excerpt of the novel that can stand alone, and especially if it fits within that magazine submission guidelines and follows all the other advice that we've been talking about, where it whether thematically or some other focus, it might be a good fit. Yeah, I think sure, why not? But I think sometimes that can be difficult to extract from such a long piece something that say is only 1,000 words. But I think there are no right or wrong answers to this.
And while it's not as common, I do think that there is also a wide breadth of literary magazines that also just accept a larger word count. Like if the majority of literary magazines are accepting between 4,000 and 6,000 words, I think it's like Story Magazine that has something in the tens. So like, and I think those magazines are a little more used to getting chapters, and they should definitely be self-contained, 1,000%, or as much as can be. But I do think that there are magazines that are a little bigger for that reason.
Great.
Of course.
Is it correct, boy, that works.
Yes.
Is it correct that you are not supposed to submit your work to more than one journal at a time?
No.
And if it is the rule, how do you make a lot of submissions without a huge body of work?
Are you wearing a wire? No. I think most magazines at this point are cool with simultaneous submissions, though please, when you do get accepted, like let the others know so that it does save us time. There are some that are holding on to the no simultaneous submissions. And I once again ask, are you wearing a wire? No, I have no opinion on those publicly.
When I started sending out work, a long time ago, it was pretty much 98% were no simultaneous submissions, and then there was weirdos who took, and now it's pretty much flipped. But it's kind of interesting, some of the places that have stuck to no simultaneous submissions have also kind of made a contract with their submitters that we will be fast. Like Three Penny Review is the fastest rejection in the world. I love it. It's it's so painless. It's like I submit in the evening before I go to bed. I wake up in the morning and it's rejected.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No. I think it's an automatic reply at this point. I thought they were out of office last time.
Hi, thanks for being here. Question about submittable, which I heard you mention a couple of times. I've kind of compartmentalized myself into only submitting to places that don't charge a reading fee because I can handle rejection a lot better if it doesn't cost me money too.
Yeah.
Tell me no, I don't mind, but don't take my money while you're doing it. So since you're on the other end of it, is that a good strategy, or should I open up the wallet and pay the reading fees when they arise? And thank you.
Again, going back to the Stone Age when I started submitting, it's like we had to pay postage, which is different from a reading fee. I understand. But I guess that's kind of part of how I've rationalized it in my mind. It's like, well, somehow this work has to get processed into the hand of the editor. And if it's $3, which is the standard submission fee, I know if you're doing a ton of submissions, it does add up. But I would, maybe you can budget a certain amount. That's like, okay, I'm mostly going to do free submissions, but I will give myself the gift of $15 a month of submissions. That might be one way to do it.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, I think there's some contests where, to me, well, this is a subjective situation, but I think that some contests, to me, it's like $20 contest and your prize is like $25. It's like, no, I'm not. Like, the math doesn't
Or 10
math.
copies.
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, no, I'm sorry, absolutely not. Just on GP. But I do think, you could definitely do good with just doing free submissions. But the $3 ones, I just try to budget myself like one night out less or whatnot for like a month, and I just try to do that personally. That's what works for me. But I think there's no wrong answer.
I think, just to add to that, I think a nominal reading fee, if for a journal that's using Submittable as a platform, is acceptable, given that Submittable does charge the journals just a cost to be on there.
Yes.
When I was starting a journal, I felt very strongly that I didn't want to have a reading fee because I was not going to be compensating people. I didn't have the funds associated with, being able to do that on a sustainable basis. So I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to charge people to read their work. So I just used an email address and continue to do so. But I do think a lot about how people are compensated for their labor, and nominating people for like best of the net, best microfiction, best, small fictions, the kind of online aggregators of these journals too is something that I think can help to offset if I were to start charging a reading fee in the future, that, authors might see that their work might have a broader audience. But in general, I think, a nominal reading fee is not, it's not a huge deal, but $30 can be, beyond the pale.
But one more question? Thank you, Dawn. Hi. Going back to the issue of digital publications that die as soon as you, like you said, yours was only up for a week, or your acceptance was only a week and it disappeared. Do you consider that a published poem? I mean, would you resubmit it as previously unpublished, or no one, I mean, it's not really out there.
That's a really interesting question. Technically, it has been published, and I could use the Wayback Machine and find it. But that is a really interesting question, and I have noticed there are a few journals now that either specialize in republishing work or that will do special issues republishing work. But no, as far as I'm concerned, those are now published, and the next time that they will see publication hopefully would be in a book. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Are we
Maybe
on
one
time?
more, Faith?
One more.
I'll let you be
Yes.
the,
Maybe one more question. Okay, this is coming from someone who is somewhat of a novice at this, even though I'm very old. Anyway, when, obviously, when you look on the internet, there are so many options. But how do you really know what is really a reputable site and what is not? And I know to do homework and so forth, but is there some sort of a publication, or is there some sort of a resource to go to say, okay, this really is a reputable magazine or a reputable editor, so to speak? So do you have any comments on that?
I have a couple of thoughts. I'm a reader for the Wigleaf Top 50, which if you go to wigleaf.com, they have a little tab that says Top 50. Every year we we read dozens of different journals that publish work online that are actively doing so, and we consider them to be, to reputable. There's a long list of, different stories that have been selected from those publications. So that's just one place that's an aggregator that you can just kind of say, I don't know what cotton xenomorph is. Let me read more about that. Some of these they do sound kind of made up. And then there are also resources like Becky Took, I think is her last name. She publishes a Substack called LitMag News, where she is pretty, she's on it. Like if I think there was a case where like a book publisher was actively accepting submission fees, but they were not publishing books. So there are people like that in the community who are, I can't say it's entirely self-policing, but those are just two resources that I can think of off the top of my head that help to kind of, as you're out there trying to be discerning and vet them a little bit. Because it is kind of a wild world online.
yeah. Listen, I see there's a lot of hands, and it's so great to see all of you here. And we have to wrap it up, but I'll speak for myself. I'm not going to run out of here, and I don't think these guys are either. So feel free to come up and ask the question individually that you couldn't. And have a great time at the book fest, and thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you all for coming.